What if I told you there was a man in the first century who performed miracles, cast out demons, raised the dead, and was believed by many to be divine? Yet almost no one talks about him today. And no, I'm not talking about Jesus. I'm talking about Apollonius of Tyana, one of the most mysterious and controversial figures of the ancient world. His story feels almost unreal. A wandering philosopher, a miracle worker, a man who may have challenged one of the most powerful religious narratives in history. But here's the real question. Was he a real person, or a carefully crafted legend? To understand Apollonius, we have to go back to the first century, a chaotic time filled with war, political tension, and spiritual upheaval. This was the era of the destruction of Jerusalem, the Great Fire of Rome, and the rise of new religious movements. And during this time, people weren't just following leaders, they were searching for saviors. Figures like Jesus weren't entirely unique in that environment. There were many wandering teachers claiming divine power, many voices promising healing, truth, and transformation. Apollonius was one of them. He was born in Tyana, in what is now modern-day Turkey, and became a follower of Pythagorean philosophy, but not in the way most people imagine. He didn't just study abstract theories or numbers. He lived a radical lifestyle. Strict vegetarian, long hair and beard, celibate, deeply spiritual, and wrapped in an air of mystery. You could think of him as a kind of ancient spiritual minimalist, or even a philosopher monk. But what made him famous wasn't his way of life. It was what people believed he could do. According to ancient accounts, Apollonius performed miracles that sound strikingly familiar. He healed the sick, cast out demons, predicted the future, and even raised the dead. Some stories claim that before he was born, his mother was visited by a god. At his birth, swans circled above him, singing, a symbolic sign often associated with divinity. Later in life, he is said to have traveled all the way to India to study with mystics, seeking the deepest truths of existence. And when he returned, he wasn't seen as just a philosopher anymore. He had become something more. Something divine. This is where things start to get truly fascinating. The similarities between Apollonius and Jesus are hard to ignore. Miraculous birth signs, healing and resurrection stories, a devoted following, even a mysterious ascension at the end of his life. Naturally, people began asking questions. Was Apollonius just another version of the same archetype? Or was his legend shaped intentionally to mirror, and perhaps compete with, the story of Jesus? Because here's the twist. Most of what we know about Apollonius comes from a book written nearly 200 years after his death by a writer named Philostratus. That's a massive gap. And many scholars believe this wasn't just a historical record. It may have been a strategic narrative. At the time, Christianity was rapidly growing in power and influence across the Roman Empire. The story of Jesus had already spread widely, shaping belief systems and culture. So in that context, presenting another figure, one who could perform similar miracles or even surpass them, starts to look less like coincidence and more like intention. Some historians argue that Apollonius was essentially framed as a kind of pagan counterpart to Jesus, a way to suggest that divine power and miraculous acts were not exclusive to one religion, that these stories, these abilities, existed beyond a single belief system. It wasn't necessarily about disproving Christianity, but about challenging its uniqueness. And in doing so, Apollonius became more than a man. He became a symbol in a much larger cultural and philosophical debate. But beyond the miracles and the controversy, what truly stands out are the ideas attributed to him. Apollonius rejected animal sacrifice, which was deeply embedded in ancient religious traditions. Instead, he believed that the divine did not require offerings or rituals. According to him, the highest connection to God came through the mind, through thought, awareness, and inner understanding. It was a perspective that feels surprisingly modern, even today. A shift away from external acts of devotion toward internal consciousness. So who was Apollonius of Tyana, really? A real philosopher whose life inspired legends? A miracle worker whose story was amplified over time? Or a carefully constructed figure designed to challenge the rise of Christianity? The truth is, we may never fully know. But maybe that's not the most important part, because his story reveals something deeper about human nature. It shows that across history, people have always searched for meaning, for miracles, and for something greater than themselves. And maybe the most fascinating part isn't whether Apollonius was real, but why stories like his continue to exist.